ever.
I was about to say we have about 45 people. I wasn't going to put it just like that, Nicole, but get started.
I think we're all zoomed out.
Yeah,
I know I am.
For sure.
A lot of really good Zoom habits now, I think, with the muting and the waiting patiently. Obviously, I'm not good at that, but I'm a Capricorn and just can't stop from talking sometimes. So, huh, Carrie?
Yeah, well, you do you.
So we have almost 50 people here. So let's get started. So thank you everyone for joining us for this special edition of the Virtual Writers Salon. My name is Chelsea and I am the Alumni Engagement Manager at Mills. I'm class of 2013 and it's been a privilege to work on this series for our constituents, and also it's been really wonderful to hear from authors that I would never have been in contact with otherwise. This month we are really excited to have this space for our Black authors who are graciously spending their time with us tonight. And of course, we want to thank them as much as possible as they share their work and their thoughts with us. This event started at our reunion in person, and it was a really great event then, and it's an even better one now. As we get started, just a bit of housekeeping. If you could please keep yourselves muted, especially when authors are reading so that they have center stage. If you have questions for our authors, I really encourage you to ask them. Please put them in the chat and we'll ask them of our authors after they finish their piece. And then finally, what I wanted to take a moment to do was first share that we at Mills are on Ohlone land. Not physically for most of us, but mentally and emotionally we're there, and we want to thank the Ohlone people for their stewardship and care of the land in the past, their stewardship and care of the land now in the present, and their stewardship and care of the land and their presence in our cultural landscape in the future. Now, thank you. I'll stop talking and I'll get to my co-host, Kirstyne Lange, class of 2012.
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here with you all this evening. And what a ball it was to get the email from Chelsea about this exciting event this evening and to lean into some of my Mill sisters that I had the luxury of being a part of their writing journey at Mills and have seen the works they are putting out into the world today. And most importantly, that they agreed to join us and share them all with us this evening. As Chelsea mentioned, I was class of 2012, not at all in any a writer by self-proclamation, but for sure enjoy putting thoughtful pieces together for those who get to share time with me on social media. And I love volleyball. That's where I spend my time. And so as you can imagine, sheltering in place and doing Zoom workouts has been quite tedious. And I'm hoping that in the coming weeks, I get to be back with my teams because that's what keeps me grounded.
And here we are. So we are going to get started with our first author tonight. Our first author being someone who has been reading with us for a very long time and has been coming to our in-person reunion writer salons for a while. And when we decided to do this salon, I was really excited to honor her commitment and time at Mills. And so I would like to introduce to you Sheryl Bize-Boutte, class of 1973. Cheryl has read for us before, as I said, and is a Pushcart Prize nominee, an Oakland multidisciplinary writer whose autobiographical and fictional short story collections, along with her lyrical and stunning poetry, artfully succeed in getting across deeper meanings about the politics of race and economics without breaking the narrative. Her writing has been variously described as rich, vivid imagery, incredible, and great contributions to literature. Her first novel, Betrayal on the Bayou, was published in June 2020, and a poetry collection she has written with her daughter, Dr. Angela M. Boute, titled No Poetry, No Peace, was published in August 2020. She is also a popular literary reader, presenter, storyteller, curator, and MC for local events. I believe time permitting, we'll be hearing from both Betrayal on the Bayou, which is a magical historical fiction work, and from No Poetry, No Peace. Cheryl, I'm going to spotlight you. You are.
Oh, I feel the heat. Thank you, Chelsea, for that wonderful introduction. I'm going to get right into it and read a little piece from my debut novel, Betrayal on the Bayou. Betrayal on the Bayou, I have to say, has been a journey for me. It took me 10 years to put it together, and I finally did. It just all came to me at once one day, and I just started writing. And it takes place in 1854 over a 28-year span in the fictional valley of Tassin Valley in Louisiana. And here is just a little piece of it. Since she was the boss's daughter, they kept their romance a secret. They managed to meet often while Francisco was portside, and their passion only grew. They both knew they needed to be together forever. Francisco felt that he had risen high enough in the Devereaux organization to be worthy of Clotilde and asked her to marry him. She accepted right away. She took him home to make the announcement to her parents. Her mother fainted at the news. Her father simply said, "That's fine." And then Mr. Devereaux posted Francisco to a long-term assignment at sea to keep him from his daughter. "Clotilde," he raged, "no daughter of mine will marry a common seaman, let alone a Black Spaniard. Then we will run away." Clotilde managed to get word to Francisco on the ship, and they arranged to meet at his next port. But it was not to be. Mr. Devereaux had been told of their plans by Eduardo and stopped Clotilde from leaving. Word of Eduardo's betrayal soon reached Francisco, who came up with a plan to rescue Clotilde from her parents' clutches. During his time on the sea, Francisco had saved many Devereaux ships from pirates. If Devereaux didn't want to give his daughter's hand to him the easy way, he would get her hand the hard way. He would turn on him and work with his enemies, the thieves of the sea. It didn't take much for him to transform from first mate to pirate partner. The first ship was the hardest, but he soon found that all he had to do was let the pirates board, take what they wanted, and leave a bit for the crew and himself. Soon Francisco was a pirate himself, finding he could ruin Devereaux more quickly that way. With this cargo undelivered to an ever-increasing number of angry clients and being sold in outside markets, it didn't take long for Francisco to send Devereaux Shipping Company into financial ruin. Soon Francisco was able to triumphantly return to Paris with the plan to save the company in exchange for Clotilde's hand in marriage. Instead, what he found upon arrival in Paris was that in order to save his company, Devereaux had sold Clotilde to a man named Emile Bourdon, and they had already left for America. Still, he was determined to find her. Using his maritime connections, he searched and searched until he finally located the captain of the ship that had taken Clotilde to the port of New Orleans. "Oh yes, I remember them," the old captain began. Arrogant he was, very frail, her. "What happened once they arrived?" "She never got off the ship, mister." "Well, what happened to her?" Francisco pleaded. "I don't know. That's the same thing I told the man when he asked me back then." "Well, she couldn't have just disappeared." "It sure seemed that way. We searched the ship and there was no sign of her." "What? How is that possible?" "He was the same way, angry and pushing me like you. Last I saw him, he was on the dock of the Port of New Orleans, holding a crying baby and walking toward a carriage. A baby? Yes. I never saw any of them after that. And that's from Betrayal on the Bayou. And I'd like to read a poem from No Poetry, No Peace that I wrote with my daughter. We just got together one day and decided to collect all this poetry we had been writing for years and put it in a book. And that's what this is. This poem is called On the Grass. I paid the ice cream man in loose buttons for a sidewalk sundae, balanced on my trike. I raced the mail truck and won, with the last stick lick melting in my mouth, and not my hand, I parked my trike on the grass. Here come those boys who dare to challenge my badness already emerged. On my big girl Schwinn, with fearless speed we rode, screaming out above our own bicycle tire on asphalt din. And this I do willingly to compensate for the noise I make when eating Laura Scudder potato chips. I lean my bike to the right so smooth I take the curve. When they fall back astounded, I dust them all off. Sun setting, hair flying, snot frozen in an artful slash on the side of my face, eyes watering. I am home in time to wash up for chicken and rice. I park my bike on the grass. I treat her well, she does me the same. Then I betray her with another and another. When I am degreed, I must have something new, but I never forget my first. Finicky she was, yet loyal when I was not. So many came after her. I parked my Valiant, my Vega, my Grand Prix, my Toronado, my Honda, my Dodge, my Cimarron on the grass. Jobbed up, hard battles harm my soul. I don't know yet that I'm not winning. Ladder climbed, wars and bodies left behind for maintenance of place, good cheddar, good steak, big televisions, living the streaming life. New bikes denied the ride, afraid of the speed, of dirty hair, of not being able to stop, of falling, of wetness on my body, of being seen without cover, of everything. Grass is now premium sod, small patches surrounded by plants with no life cycle. Not for living on, I mean, just look at it. No interaction required for drop-free wax. I park my Mercedes in the garage. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. As folks are gathering their questions and thoughts to drop in the chat, I'm going to start us off. Cheryl, could you share a little bit about your publication journey with us?
My publication journey, let's see. Well, I have to start when I was 12. I was always a very talkative child. In fact, I talked so much I got sent home from school with notes on my chest that I talked too much. Hence, I have a blog that's now called Talking in Class. And my parents bought me a typewriter so that I could start writing, because I think they felt that if I was writing, I wouldn't be talking. And that's what really started it. And then fast forward to Mills, and I'm writing for the newspaper, which was the Mills Stream back then. And I had a column all through my years at Mills. And my first major publications, again, came from Mills. First through Nan Geffen, who's a Mills alum, who had or has a Persimmon online magazine. And then from Jennifer Bosier, I hope she's here somewhere on watching tonight, who gave me my first opportunity to be published in an anthology with a major publisher, Harlequin. And it just took off from there. And then I started to do my self-publishing, because I really just didn't want anyone to mess with my voice. And since I don't write for the money, I write for the joy. That's one of the reasons I self-publish, and I'm having a wonderful time.
That is so awesome to hear. And it sounds like, you know, a long journey of pulling together your creativity, your life's experiences, your exposure. It looks like we've got a question here from Chelsea. How emotional was it to write a book with your daughter, and did it change the way that you view one another?
Well, we've always been very, very close. My daughter is a special person. She was born when I was 6 months pregnant. She only weighed 1.5 pounds. And it was such a significant thing that a news station went over to the hospital in San Francisco to do a feature on her way back when she was born. And so we've always had a connection. She has the same as with her father as well. And it's really been the three of us. And so when we decided to do the poetry, it was kind of like an automatic evolution. It really wasn't emotional in a negative sense. It was very joyful.
It sounds like a really beautiful relationship that you all share. And what have you learned together as you've pulled together your poetry? What has been the most standout memory that you guys shared together, or in your own writing of your own novel? What has been your biggest, highlight in those moments?
Well, I think the biggest highlight was writing the poetry book with my daughter was that we both always knew that you had to think with both sides of your brain, that old left brain, right brain thing. My daughter is a PhD neuroscientist. Poetry is her escape. It is her relaxation. Neuroscience is her life, her lifeblood. Whereas with me, the poetry and the writing is my lifeblood, and the dabbling in the sciences is my escape. And so it was a natural coming together. The novel started out as an autobiography, but I quickly found that I couldn't write an autobiography with all of that stuff in it. So I really wrote short stories that were autobiographical, and decided that I had more freedom in the novel space. And that's why I chose to do it as a novel. And like I said, it was 10 years in the making because I let it simmer a long time. And then one day it just came and it was there. And that's the way I do everything. When it's there, it's there. If it's not there, I don't worry about it. I go do something else. Hey, Jennifer, I see you there.
Well, we still have an opportunity to hear from Cheryl. Are there any other questions that folks want to bring up? I mean, I know dropping into the chat can also be an experience, but certainly if you want to unmute and ask your question or say hi, I'm seeing some shout outs and kudos in the chat, and welcome you and invite you to join verbally since we're so virtual.
Yeah.
Hi, Cheryl. This is Debbie Wood, class of 75.
Hey, Debbie.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm very well, very well. I totally enjoyed your poem and your excerpt from Betrayal on the Bayou. What are you working on now?
I'm actually trying to come up with a sequel to Betrayal on the Bayou. And one of the things that I'm struggling with is which direction to take, because there's so many ways that I can go. And I'm thinking about being a little bit more metaphysical and getting more into the Bayou voodoo aspects, which I'm not going to call voodoo. I'm just going to say that people have some powers, because I think we all do.
Very deep spiritual power.
Deep spiritual power. And so, yeah, that's kind of what I'm working on now. But I'm also, in the meantime, doing a lot of events, poetry readings, and I'll be at the Mechanics Institute during Poetry Month. And I'll be doing some things with the Women's National Book Association. So if you go to my website, which is SherylBize-Boutte.com, SherylBize-Boutte.com, I'm sorry, you'll see what I'm up to. Did I see you out there, Maila?
I believe Maila is here.
Yes, I'm here. I'm sorry.
I just want to say hello.
Hi, Cheryl. I've purchased all your books, and I've
Thank you
read
for the support.
your books, and the Bayou is by far. I think it took me 2 days to read it, and I kept wanting to put it down and kept going to grab it. So it's a really good read, and I'm so proud of you, Cheryl.
Thank you.
Cheryl sang at my parents' wedding, so I might not be here if it wasn't for you.
Yeah, and I know, Maila and I, her family, I've known before you even thought of, I used to sing with her grandfather, who was a musician. I was his vocalist way back in the day.
Wow. I love hearing the deep histories and connections that everyone shares. And it's often these spaces where you learn all of those connections and how everybody's built these long-standing familial relationships just beyond what we know to be the space of Mills that has brought us together over time.
That's what Mills does.
Mm-hmm. It certainly does. I have a question in here, though, that's coming in from Michelle. Do you find that voodoo is a combo of good or bad, or purely one or the other?
I don't really, like I said, I don't get into the voodoo thing. I think that people have spiritual powers. I think that some people have more than others. I think some people are in tune with theirs more than others. My grandfather used to tell us voodoo stories all the time, but they were really ghost stories. And so, I just think that sometimes people think they can put roots on people, they can do things to people, but I think people have their own fate.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That rings true. I think about in doing some genealogy and ancestry work recently, and that's definitely something. In talking to an elder cousin, she tried to convey some of the stories that my grandparents told us, and she's like, well, that's rooted in something else. And it's making more sense now, the ways in which they talked around but didn't want to name voodoo or the religious connections that they had and shared. And
exactly,
it's really interesting as now 3 or 4 generations removed, trying to unpack what some of those sayings or familial traditions that we have, what all that means, and how they used it as, in some instances, a survival tool or communication, interfamily wise.
Right. And I think because I'm also into storytelling, I think if you look at some of the stories that have been told throughout generations from different cultures, you will find such similarities. I mean, there's almost the same stories are repeated over and over, just in different ways with different characters. And I don't think that people's spiritual beliefs are any different from that. There's always magical characters and people with magical powers. Mm-hmm. And I don't think voodoo is anything that's any more special than any of those other things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I like that.
Me?
I have a question. We can hear you, Michelle.
Oh, okay. Just to follow up, I asked that question. I also, through Ancestry, am finding some connections there, and a lot of that history. Some of my research has shown that a lot of people in that area were Catholic, and it's not kosher, I guess, or it was blasphemous to have practices of voodoo, and it turns out that it's some sort of an amalgamation with hoodoo from West Africa that was brought over. And my understanding is that a lot of people who were Catholics on the side, if you will, were also a large percentage, more than the majority, I think, more than half, practiced both, but they just didn't, want to get thrown out of the Catholic Church. So,
right. That's true.
Yeah.
Yes. No, I definitely found those same similarities. Definitely interesting. And looking forward to hearing how you continue to explore that notion, Cheryl, in your next piece, as it comes through the work. We have one more question that came in from Carol Wolf. She writes, I'm intrigued, really intrigued by your characterization, Betrayal in the Bayou as an autobiography, when it's also historical. And could you share a little bit more about?
Well, I think that when people write fiction, you can't help as a human being to insert your real life into it in some places. But I didn't, it's not autobiographical for me, because as I said, I tried to do that and that wasn't working for me. So that's why I went the fiction route, and I went the historical fiction route because I was more interested in what had happened way back in the day when things were first formed. And I wanted to have a starting place that showed the root of certain things, like the roots of colorism and systemic racism. But I wanted to show it in a different way with a different set of people that maybe folks have not explored before. And that was through the free people of color, and also through the African slaves who lived side by side with them, and through some of the relationships that people may not realize that occurred back in those times. And so that was really my rationale for doing it the way I did it.
Awesome. Janice, did you want to jump in?
Yes. Can you hear me? Okay, I can hear myself. Hi, Cheryl.
Hi.
It's been amazing listening to your story and your book. I believe it's just probably phenomenal. I am going to purchase.
Oh, thank you.
Question regarding your research. Do you do your research by through different parts of countries or places? I'm here in Louisiana.
Yeah.
Okay.
Most of this is based in a fictional Louisiana town. The thing about writing fiction is you need to have an anchor of truth and fact in order to let your imagination then spring from that. So that's the way I write. That's the way I think. So I did research based not only on factual evidence from the time periods that I was writing about, but also from my real family and things that they went through and things they said. Because, you know, one of the things writers will tell you is that the minute you start writing dialogue that's in the past, you're already writing fiction. Because if you weren't there, you don't know what people said.
Right.
So that was another reason why traveling toward the historical fiction route, and the research was based both on, I mean, you know, Wikipedia and Google are wonderful for finding little seeds of fact that you can look at, you can say, but in my imagination, I'm going to take this over here. And,
right.
And that's really what I did with almost every story and every piece of the book.
I believe it's going to be a great one. Considering listening to some of the stories that I have heard, being here, I've only been in New Orleans 2 years, and I just find it incredible. You know, as you said, I believe the question was asked, do you think that it's more like a good or bad thing? I believe in a deep spirituality, and you said it perfect. You know, everybody have their own faith, have their own belief, and some their own power. Some is stronger, some is, you know, it depends on the individual. And I believe your story is going to be good when you begin to write about this fiction book of yours.
Well, I just quickly, I asked that question because I have a character who is deep into it, and the portrayal historically, you know, in movies and things has been with a negative slant, and I'm just not finding that to be the case.
Yeah.
Well, so this has been a wonderful discussion, and actually, if you're interested, Michelle, who was just asking a question, was in one of our previous writers' salons. If you want to find the video and enjoy Michelle's writing and thoughts, it is on our YouTube channel. Just plugging that there.
A little promo, huh?
Yes, a little promo. I think how to do that. Alumni Relations.
Very cool.
Mills College YouTube channel. You can find us there, and that's where this video will be posted hopefully next week, so you can continue to enjoy it in the future. And also, just FYI, that we'll be putting all of our links from our authors in the chat as they're reading, so you can check out their writing or their websites and find their books. I know a couple people have mentioned wanting to purchase, so that is where they'll be, and we'll also include those in that email next week with the video link. Our next author is Ericka Duke, and Ericka graduated from Mills in 2015 with a master's in education leadership, and they're currently finishing their PhD at Xavier University, which is a historically Black university. Congratulations on that educational leadership there. They're living in New Orleans and teaching 8th grade English language, which we were just discussing with vaccinations and such before we began. And they're molding our next generation, which is wonderful. Tonight we'll be hearing from Ericka's work, Blossom Black Girl, which is a book of affirmations. And again, those links will be posted in the chat. You can also find Ericka on Instagram at Ericka J Duke, ERIJDUKE. Ericka, I'm going to spotlight you, and you're up. I think you might be muted there.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. My Zoom is actually, this is what I use for my classroom. And so there's always like technical issues. I can be unmuted and my students they will message me, Miss Duke, you're mute. We can't hear you. Anyways, thank you for the introduction. Like she said, my name is Ericka. I felt as though she was talking about many. There's only one of me, Ericka, she, her, it really doesn't matter, but it's Ericka. And I live here in New Orleans. I was living in the Eastern Caribbean, so it was really interesting listening to you, Miss Cheryl. I'm going to say Miss Cheryl. You probably be like, just call me Cheryl. No, Miss Cheryl. Listening to you speak about like just the historical presence and the spiritual presence here in, especially like in the Deep South. And it just reminded me of like the Eastern Caribbean, the Caribbean, and just the African diaspora in general. But I'm not going to take up a lot of time because I need to read. So I too am a self-published author. I, like Miss Cheryl, I really just enjoy writing just for the joy of it. I don't really look for a paycheck from it. I just enjoy writing, and I love to affirm Black women, Black girls. I feel as though when I'm affirming Black women specifically and Black girls, at the end of the day, I'm affirming humanity. So everyone in this Zoom room falls under humanity. We're all humans and we all share the same earth, right? And so I feel as though it's my duty to affirm women who look like me, women of the African diaspora of many different hues. And so I wrote this in 2017, a few years after I graduated from Mills. I've always been a writer. I have a few published things, academic pieces I could share. I didn't really share in the email, but I can share that once I'm done. But let's get into it. And I'm just going to read a few pieces. I'm going to read the original affirmation when I first started my book. I don't drive. And so sometimes I'll be on the AC transit and an affirmation, a line would just come to my mind, and I will either jot it down in my phone or jot it down in my journal or on a napkin. I would just jot them down and collect these different affirmations. And so every affirmation begins with the line, Blossom Black Girl. And so here we go. Blossom Black Girl, blossom. Blossom in all your glory, right? So before we even get started, I hope the chat is open. What does it mean to blossom to you all? Just drop that in the chat box as I'm reading. Like, what does it mean to blossom to you? When I think of blossoming, I think of gardens, I think of flowers, I think of new life, I think of breathing, I think of loving yourself, Claudia, indeed. And so as I'm reading these affirmations, just think of what it means to blossom, and how do you do that in your everyday life, especially as a woman. My next one, and I wrote, when I read this, every time I read my affirmations, I get something different from it. Blossom, Black girl, blossom. Blossom in every which way possible. I wrote this one because when I think about the diversity of Black women and where we come from various different walks of life. We come from various different geographies. We come from just all over the world. And so our shared collective make it really, really possible for us as Black women, Black girls, and just women. And so I'll read this one again. Blossom, Black girl, blossom. Blossom in every which way possible, right? And I'm loving these meanings of what it means to blossom, a fresh start, growth, opening up to yourself, fulfilling one sense of purpose, to blossom, to grow into your fullest, most powerful self, a form of beauty and creation. I definitely agree. And so when I think of what it means to blossom, and like I said, I write to affirm Black women and Black girls, like I have this strong affinity towards Black women. I think of our shared collectives. I think of our shared experiences, and I think of ways that are possible for us to continue to grow, for us to continue to thrive. When I think about the society and even the world we live in, and how Black women are placed in a certain, I would say in a certain box. And so it's really, really, I don't know, fulfilling for me to write about Black women. This one is one dedicated to our ancestors. I also think about how Black women have the highest rate of homicide in this country. I think about how we have seen just repeatedly Black women killed by police brutality. And so I think about the women that have gone before us. I think about the women that have recently passed away, recently been killed. And so I wrote this one, and this one reads like this. Blossom, Black girl, blossom. Blossom courageously, just as your ancestors did. And I'm going to read it again. Blossom, Black girl, blossom. Blossom courageously, just as your ancestors did. And we can have our own definition of what an ancestor is. When we think about ancestors, we think about those who paved the way, those who came before us. And we may also think about ancestors being those who were probably taken away from us, you know? And so blossom, Black girl, blossom. Blossom courageously for those who have gone before you and those who have gone after you, you know? And so I just think about this affirmation as one to affirm you in who you are, to pay respect and honor to those who are watching over you now. And yeah, I just thought about just the Black women that are experiencing death. You know, when we think about Black women in this world, not even just in this country, but just in the world, the brutality that we experience, it could be a tough one. It's a hard one, it's brutal, right? And so that's that. And I'm not going to read a lot. I'm going to end by reading a few and then go from there if you have questions. Here we go. This one reads, blossom, Black girl, blossom. Blossom with the strength of 1,000 moons pulling the ocean tides. Blossom, Black girl, blossom. Blossom because you're more than able to blossom. You were created with the strength of many moons, thought before your very existence, thought of before your very existence. Blossom, Black girl, blossom. Blossom with the hopeful expectation that you will reap every promise bestowed upon you. Blossom, Black girl, blossom. Blossom because there are girls of many hues, just like you, who will reap the harvest of your bloom time glory. And I'm going to continue. Blossom, Black girl, blossom. Blossom because you are a flower, a wildflower. Blossom, Black girl, blossom. Blossom because sometimes you will have to blossom in places where your glory isn't fully recognized. But still in those places, Black girl, blossom. Blossom, Black girl, blossom. Blossom in all your glory because it is fully needed to tell your truth. forever, always blossom. Blossom, Black girl, forever and always, because you are eternal. And I'm going to end on that note. And before I end, I just want to know, how have you blossomed in your glory today, this evening? It's the evening time where I'm at in New Orleans, but how have you blossomed today? Not in just today. What did you do to blossom in all your glory? And that's it. Blossom, Black girl.
Yay! Shameless plug. I used to work in private independent schools, and before I left my last school in Los Angeles, Ericka's book was on my desk, and it's not often you find so many young Black girls in independent schools, and I had the opportunity to have 23 in my school, and I didn't buy 23 of them books, but I bought 8 for all the seniors that were going off into the world and looking for an opportunity to just have some comfort in a new setting and a new environment. And so I text them regularly to double check that they're still using the book. And they're like, yes, it's a reminder. It's a good way for me. And like, we talk about it with our friends. And so it was a good book for me when I first purchased it. And I am so glad you developed a tool to help us share with all of those around us and really engage in this conversation today. It's just, I'm really loving to see how everyone's connecting with the words in the chat. So awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, let me try to comb through. Does anyone have any questions? Sorry, I'm trying to go through the chat. I'm loving these sharing of blossom, blooming in your glory.
I'm loving them too. Thank you.
Everyone's blown away, my friend. And how long does it normally take to compose a poem?
That's a good question. I'm so unorthodox with everything I do. I'm not an orthodox writer. I don't sit down and make time like I'm going to spend X amount of hours writing. Like I said in the beginning, like I could be on the bus or I could be in the gym or I could just be in my classroom and something will come to mind and I will just make sure I write it down. My mother taught me to carry a journal with me everywhere I go. So I actually do. It's crazy. And so even if that journal is not specifically dedicated to writing about my personal life or whatever it may be or goals, I need to have a space where I could just, if something come to mind, I could just jot it down. I don't have a specific process. I guess that's what that is what makes my writing or my writing process unique. The only type of process I have is with my PhD work. You know, you need to be focused and have a specific process with that.
And how do you move through a writer's block? Like when you have an emotion or concept that you can feel but can't find the right words. How do you navigate that?
How do I move through a writer's block? Like when I need to read it to myself again. That's how I moved. I repeat it. How do I move through a writer's block? Like when I have an emotion or concept that can feel but can't find the right words. That's a good question. I don't force anything. If it's extremely emotional, and then it's kind of hard for me to remove myself as a writer. Like I write about Black women. If you go on my Instagram page, you'll see everything is specifically dedicated to Black women. And I do that deliberately. I do that intentionally. I do that on purpose. And so if I cannot find the right words to it, like anything else, I have to put it down and come back to it. And if I forget about it, I forget about it. Clearly, it wasn't meant to be. But if I come back to it, I come back to it and boom, I'm back at it. I hope that answered. Like I said, I don't really have I just go with the flow of things. And if it doesn't set my soul on fire at the time, then so be it. I'm moving on. Maybe it'll set my soul on fire later on, even if it's emotionally setting my soul on fire. That's just how I move and groove. Black women and Black girls set my soul on fire. And if Black women and Black girls are setting my soul on fire, clearly I'm setting the world on fire, which I'm able to reach out to women of color, just men, just everyone. And so I like to just, I don't know. That's a great question, Chelsea. Chelsea, you asked that question. That's a great question. Great question.
Did your time in the Grenadines and teaching in the Caribbean, how did that impact your connection to writing, given just, I mean, I don't even want to load the question. How was that?
That's crazy. That's a great question. So I would write for the Peace Corps. So I was in the Peace Corps when I was living in the Eastern Caribbean. And my time was unfortunately cut short because of COVID. But just like my writing was greatly impacted because I guess going to Chelsea's question, the emotion, I felt as though I was emotionally in a very different space as a Black woman, as an American. I will often like text my mom and be like, Mom, I'm trying to deal with my North Americanness. And I'd be like, is that even a word? Can I even say that? Yes, Ericka, you can say whatever you want to say, because I was dealing with so many emotions, and my writing would be all over the place because it was a new world to me, a different paradigm. When we talk about even when we talk about spirituality and just even the academics, and so it was just a lot for me as an individual to take in. I did start writing a short story. I was like, I'm not gonna start with a novel. Let me start with a short story. And it's centered around the African diaspora and Yoruba tradition and hoodoo. When we go back to talking about hoodoo, the Haitian community, the Eastern Caribbean, all of this, right? Looking at the history of just kind of like the West African slave trade and how so many of us was dropped in various different parts of the Americas. And how that tradition and culture from West Africa is very much so expressed and just lived in these various different parts of the Americas. Sometimes it's acknowledged and other times it's not acknowledged. And so it was just really, I don't know, interesting. It grew me up in a lot of places where I needed to grow up academically, spiritually, emotionally, in so many ways. And it really did enhance my writing. But like Chelsea said, yeah, it was pretty emotional because I was just trying to figure out and so if it were emotional for me, I would literally just stop. Not stop in terms of giving up, but just stop because I don't want to overwhelm myself with emotion and then I can't give. If I'm overwhelmed with something, I won't be able to give. So I had to stop for a little bit. But it was a great experience there in the Eastern Caribbean. It was great, very great.
Awesome. I love to hear that and just to learn a lot more about how your environments have, influenced how you connect to putting your pieces together. And being back now in New Orleans and teaching and navigating both spaces, I mean, polar opposite environments, but I'm sure there's some similarities. How has that yet impacted where you're seeing your work growing in this next year?
If you could teach in New Orleans, and when I say teach in New Orleans, I mean teach with heart, but I also mean if you know your content, and you really know what you're teaching, and you have, and your kids that you're teaching, because you have to think, I'll give you who I teach in New Orleans. I teach Black kids in New Orleans. I don't teach kids that come from affluent communities. They come from marginalized communities. They come from the 9th Ward, That's where Katrina mostly hit. I have students that come from the 7th Ward. I have students from Uptown, students from the project, students coming to school that they lights off, right? Even when it was virtual learning, we were giving out, what are they called? Hotspots for students. Like we were giving those out to students because most of my students don't have Wi-Fi. And so when I think about just like the similarities of Black kids, I think about the similarities of Black kids of the African diaspora in general. There's so many similarities. But then when I think about the context of America and the context of places outside of America, I'm not even gonna say third world because that third world places, that drives me. But when I think about countries outside of America, and then we think about poverty, to me, poverty is poverty. If you don't have it, poverty can be poverty, but then in a context, or if you want to be super academic and you're talking about poverty and you want to write an article on poverty, when you look at how poverty is shaped in various different places, like in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, it's kind of like you're rich or poor. It's like no in between. And so my experience as a Peace Corps volunteer there, and I'm gonna answer your question about the students. My experience as a Peace Corps volunteer there, when you think about Peace Corps, you're living in the community. I was living on the windward side, on the countryside of the island. I was probably about 45 minutes outside of town. And it's a tiny island, right? Tiny, secluded island. But when I think about it, I'm like, am I, as an American here in this country, am I like in the middle? I wasn't rich, but I wasn't poor, but America was taking very much so good care of their American citizens while there. And so it was just the dynamics of poverty and education, and it's really interesting. And so to go back to my students here in New Orleans, there's a lot of similarities, especially when you think about New Orleans and the richness of New Orleans, the history of New Orleans, the spirit of New Orleans. New Orleans can be its own island. People from New Orleans don't even say they from Louisiana. They from New Orleans. They not from Baton Rouge. They not from Lafayette. They not from Kenner. They not from Metairie. They from New Orleans, all right? When you speak to them, they have a particular way of speaking. They have a particular way of greeting you. They have a particular way of just being, because it's like, it's crazy. I'm on break right now. I didn't have to go to school and teach because it was Mardi Gras, right? And so when you even think about the culture, the tradition, the music, bounce music, the brass bands, you think about the various different crews, and during Mardi Gras, you have Zulu, you have the Mardi Gras Indians, you have all of this, and it tells the story of like during the 1800s, before the 1800s, everything. Is really interesting just living here. And so I would say my students in the Caribbean and here in New Orleans, if they were all to come together, it would be one big party. And let me tell you, we will need to have people here to tame them. It's just like when I say tame, that could be such a hard word, but they'll be going crazy, especially young kids. They'll be going crazy. And so I love it. I love teaching. It's fun to me. I learned a lot about myself when I first moved here. I was teaching 5th grade uptown in the Broadmoor area. And one of my 5th graders told me that, she said, "Miss Duke, you're Black like," she said, "you're Black, but you're not Black like us." That could be a whole dissertation. And so she's absolutely right. I am Black, but I'm not Black like you, right? She recognized that. She recognized my disposition. She recognized the ways in which I speak. She recognized that. She just recognized so much. I'm from the West Coast, born and raised. I'm from Sacramento, California. And so moving here to the South, it was just a culture shock for me. And so plenty of similarities when you think about the South in general and the Caribbean. Like I said, we were dropped off already in various different parts of the Americas. We the youngest one. America is the youngest. And so it's just like, yeah, you know, I don't know. I'm done talking because I could go on and on. Gonna drop
No, I
a
think it's amazing to
Them
hear all of the different aspects of your story and you know how it it impacts, you know, you live and you breathe your writing and your work and your creativity and all of your surroundings, they influence that. And it's amazing to just hear you spill all that out so generously with us.
May I answer one more question, Miss
Oh yes.
Carol? And I'm calling everyone Miss, that's just my demeanor. So please don't be offended if I say Miss, but I shouldn't. Carol, let me just say your first name, Carol. What did you do in the Caribbean for the Peace Corps? Peace Corps. I worked with the Ministry of Education. So first, before I was in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, I was in St. Lucia, and then they transferred me to St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So there in St. Vincent, I was working with the Ministry of Education. I was always in the office. I was working, writing grants, getting funding for literacy programs. And then I will also go to various different schools on the windward side of the island. So the windward side of the island is the Atlantic side of the island. And I would work with various different teachers, specifically grade 3 through 6 teachers, in regards to just reading literacy, and work closely with administrators. That's pretty much it. It was really a great experience. And then I'll go to various different conferences and on different islands as well. The islands are just, they're so, I didn't know that. They're so close to each other. Yeah. It was really fun.
Awesome. Yes. Does anyone else have questions that they want to ask aloud? Again, I know the chat is definitely available, but if you want to hop on and let us hear your voice. I'm sure everyone, like the rest of us, are having, oh, wow, that's awesome moment. So please hop in and ask your questions if you have one. Alex has dropped in what's a WWOZ? I don't know what that is.
It's a radio station in New Orleans. They stream online. It's community only. There's no app. Like I've been a member of them for years and years. They get $20 a month. It's the only thing that I pay for, really. But they are any New Orleans style music, any people out of New Orleans, so Irish and Afro-Latinx and African, you know, like, and Caribbean. I mean, just all of it. They stream. They play all of it. It's amazing.
Okay, I'm gonna write that down.
There's one more question. I don't know how we are on time. I can answer it, but I promise you I'll keep it short.
Yeah. And it's, how are the kids doing in the pandemic, re-school, and learning?
So I teach middle school. I teach 8th grade, grade 8, English, and I think a lot of what kids just in general, at least my students, I can only speak for my students, they want to be in school. And I think it just really depends on, you know, the circumstance. Kids just, a lot of my students want to be around. They want that social experience, being the fact they think about it like this. They're getting ready to transition into high school. So they want to be around each other. They want to apply to high school together. And so it's just, they've been good. At my school, we offer COVID tests every other Tuesday to students as well and families. And so there's a lot of resources available to the community, well, family and communities. With I teach for a charter school, the CMO that I teach with. And so they were upset when we had to begin the first week of school virtually, but then we went in person. And then after winter break, school, we went back to distance learning. So they were real upset about that. And then, you know, we came back. And so they're kind of like, I've been already getting text messages. We're on break right now about like, Miss Duke, are we coming back? Did you hear any word about school? I'm like, I think we're good. And so they really want to be in the school building. And it's been I've been feeling good about it. Of course, you want to think about like just your health, your safety. I haven't had any issues with my students keeping their mask off or taking their mask off. Um, and again, I don't teach like little babies, and so it's kind of different for me, at least. But it's been a good ride thus far, like a yo-yo. But it's been good. It's been good.
I like that. Thank you so much for sharing your journey to writing. Everyone's reimagining what it means to blossom this evening. I hope you tap in and get your affirmation journals so that you can begin to continue to understand your connection to thinking out loud in your work. And perhaps the affirmation journal will remind you in all of the moments you have along the way, because as we've all echoed over and over, we are living in a very different time, and checking in with oneself and reminding us how amazing we are and all of our capacities is so key.
Well, I think we're at the midway point just about with our author. So our third reader tonight, I'm pleased to present is Isis Marcelin-Blanchette. Isis is class of 2011, where she studied biopsychology and ethnic studies. She's a wife and mother of 2 young boys living in Long Beach, California, where she works as a special education program director. She's been writing most of her life and is an aspiring author, writing prose, essays, poetry, historical fiction, and science fiction. So truly a Renaissance writer. Tonight, she will be sharing a piece of prose and an excerpt from her science fiction project. Isis, I'm going to spotlight you and take it away.
All righty. Good evening, everybody. I'm Isis, and I'm just super excited to be with you all tonight. I really appreciate everyone, and we're taking the time to connect and to share during these times. So, creating this space and having people gather this way, it's truly inspirational. I'm super inspired tonight. I am not a published author. That is my goal. So that's something that I've been working toward on top of, my daily career and being a mom and also being in school. So writing kind of, I really try to do it as much as I can. It does kind of take a back seat sometime, but I keep a personal journal and I write a whole bunch of different things, as we heard. But tonight I'm going to share a scene from a science fiction piece that I am working on. And this piece is a young adult fiction. And the intention behind my writing right now, I want people to be thoughtful as we go toward our future into technology and the ethical implications that will bring. We're already facing changing times, and it's just gonna accelerate. So my mind thinks about, what our future is going to be like. So here's our scene. Our scene, we have a couple, and their name is Bryce and Coral Casali, and they are driving to the Nativity Lab's secret location to get the results of their consultation. My prayers are finally answered, whispered Coral, following a few inaudible chants, paired with a quick kiss on the amethyst druzy that hung low on her neck. They had been traveling for hours, the transporter gliding just above the gravel, the steady hum of the personnel craft like a faint whistle, the only sign that they were speeding through the forsaken countryside. Lost in his own thoughts, it took Bryce a while before he heard his wife's low murmurs. Hun, I know you're nervous. Just try to relax. This is me relaxing, Coral replies. slightly rolling her eyes and biting her lip to prevent any more chance from escaping. Bise gave her a doubtful look, furrowing his brow, peering at her through the squint in his eyes. Oh, don't give me that face. No matter how silly it is, Bise had grown to secretly love Coral's unyielding dedication to whatever it is she does when he thought she was nervous. Despite the sonic speed of the transporter, it felt like an eternity before reaching the massive concrete walls that outlined the entirety of Nativity Labs. The surrounding landscape was bare. There were no trees nor brush, just rocks, dust, and gravel for tens of miles. The transporter lowered to the ground, and the thin safety glass slid open. "'Kay, you ready?" asked Bise. "Let's go get our baby." It felt good for Bise to finally stand, stretch his long legs after a long glide. "I'm used to getting to places a lot faster than this," he chuckled. However, his humor did not get too far. Coral carefully stepped out of the craft, and despite the thick soles on her tall black boots, she could feel the coarse dirt beneath her. "I wonder how they'll do on the glide back to the airport," wondered Coral. "I'm sure they'll be just fine. Come on, darling. I'm sure they're waiting for us." Seemingly from nowhere, a globular robo appeared to greet the couple. "Hello, Mr. and Mrs. Casali. Welcome to Nativity. Please follow me inside." A slender section of the concrete wall descended into the dirt below, opening into the entrance of the Nativity Labs headquarters. Robos were gliding to and fro, entering and exiting different sections of the labs. The center of the complex was an expansive courtyard, the walls lined with antique art unearthed from forgotten times, faux trees, and encased sculptures. "It's just as breathtaking as before," Coral commented while following the chubby robo to the lobby just beyond the center courtyard. "Dr. Jing Lai will soon be with you." With that, their cordial yet terse greeter glided away. Coral fumbled her druzy. Bise wrapped his arm tight around her shoulders. "It's okay to be nervous, you know. I just hope you're right about this." "Don't say that to me now. We're here. This is the moment. It's no turning back." The lobby was much different from the vibrancy of the colorful courtyard. Bare, nothing, no chairs, white walls, and glass panels. "Now this is the place one comes to clear the mind," comments Bise, chuckling, apologizing for bringing doubt into this moment. "Mr. and Mrs. Casali, such a pleasure to be with you both in person again. Are you ready to meet your baby?" Dr. Jing Lai burst through the white of the walls with a booming voice, cutting straight through to the hearts of her parents-to-be. Coral's smile grew ear to ear. Butterflies fluttered. Her heart felt as though it were beating outside her chest, leaping to get to them as fast as she could. Dr. Jiang Lai explained. "Aeon has been awake for 2 weeks now. After running a series of tests to trial their functioning, we are confident they are ready for life." "So when do we get to meet them?" questioned Bise. I can't wait another moment. Where's my baby? Exclaimed Coral. The doctor's lab assistant arrived to escort the new parents to the moment they once thought could never happen. Right this way, Mr. and Mrs. Casali. The long corridors were just as plain as the room they left. Coral wondered why the obsession with sterility, and why is it that the courtyard's robust display was so different? The lab assistant led them down the long hall and into what looked like quaint living quarters, without kitchens and bathrooms, dorms for Dr. Jiang Lai's growing number of babies. This is Aeon's room. They are ready to meet you two. And remember, Mr. and Mrs. Casali, they already know who you are. Tap this monitor if you need immediate assistance from Dr. Jiang Lai. Otherwise, she will give the family an hour to spend together before she checks in to release you. With that, she walked away and left them alone. Coral sighed, took in a deep inhale, and looked at Bros. I'm so happy, but I've got to admit, I'm a little scared. What if we're mistaken? What if people find out? Oh, relax, my love. Let's meet our child and go from there. We've come such a long way. It is time. With a wave of a hand, the glass door slid open to reveal the inside of Aeon's quarters. There were 2 rooms. The small entry room had a seating area, faux houseplants, and a large metal chest. An open doorway led to the adjacent room. They must be in there, whispered Bros. Say something, Mama. Tears swelled in Coral's eyes to hear Bros call her that for the first time. Aeon! Aeon, baby! It's your mama! Where are you, my love? Bros and Coral held their breath to listen, but there was no response. Go ahead, honey. Walk in, encouraged Bros. Coral took off her big black boots, placed them to the side, and creeped through the open door frame. With one glance, she collapsed to the floor. Tears streamed. She stammered, burying her face in her hands because she couldn't believe her eyes. Before she could collect herself, a small hand cupped her shoulder. Mama. Coral put her hand over theirs and looked into their eyes. Aeon could not have been imagined before. Their body was small, barely above Coral's knees. Their skin was silky, soft, flawless, a golden deep copper with an anomalous sheen. They had deep, honey brown eyes, thick, jet black, extra coily hair falling at the tops of the earlobes. Through her blurred eyes, Coral was awestruck, her dream finally coming true. As if they had known her from the beginning, Aeon touched their mother's amethyst druzy and instinctively sat down on her lap. Bros knew to wait outside, but he too was becoming a father. He tapped the wall before entering the room. His heart felt as if it stopped mid-beat. Wow, Kay, I don't know what to say. They look just like us. Aeon diverted their fascination with the Druzy to look at the face of their father. Daddy, said Aeon. Bras knelt down beside his wife and child, finally all together as one. Bras looked at Coral and said, I love you. Then he couldn't stop the words from repeating themselves. I love you. This time directed at Aeon. Love, 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 love. The family sat on the floor of Aeon's quarters, cuddled together, Aeon repeating their new favorite word to their parents, over and over again. An end scene.
Yay! That was
Wow.
beautiful. Wow.
Wow, wow, magnificent.
Yes.
You are an actress too. You're amazing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm
just gonna read that over and over.
I appreciate it very much. So.
I want the part of the robot.
Yes. There is definitely inquiry for your future audiobook. Your voice is so mesmerizing, and you just distinctively gave us each character. Wow. And being able to see you were sharing and showing the story. It wasn't just listening in. Wow. Let's
I really appreciate it.
A question let's start us off. Where does your interest in sci-fi come from?
That's a great question. I've always really been into science fiction. I'm a really big Octavia Butler fan, and right now I'm reading some N.K. Jemisin, and I don't know, I'm also into science fiction shows, and I like space and stuff like that. And I'm really into artificial intelligence and the ethical implications of the development of these super powerful computers and programs and the things that they can do. And it's just always captivated me. I studied biopsychology and neuroscience at Mills. So I've always been, about the brain, and we know that computers are basically modeled after the brain. And so I really like to question the blurred lines between our biology and the coming of the tech world.
Wow. Another question in from Chelsea. Chelsea's killing it with the question game. You guys got to step it up. She loves the juxtaposition of the age-old desire for a child and futuristic technology. And did you, or do you find that this is a theme in your work?
It is absolutely a theme in this particular piece. There is a very distinct reason why Coral and Bras have not been able to have a family. They've tried a lot of different ways, and due to the environmental conditions of the world that they live in, fertility is a much different thing than it is for us now. And I can't say I want to give it away. I have to give some more context. But the context is that the human population at this point in the future, I don't have an exact date when in the future this is happening, but it's well into the future after several different major events have happened. And one of the things that's going on is that due to the environmental conditions, human population is going down drastically. And so the population in this world is nothing close to our 7-8 billion. It's way down there. And people still want to have families, the people who are still around, but that the family life is so impacted at this point in the future where even people like Ross and Coral have to go to pretty great lengths to, have that fulfillment. Another side note about them is that they're wealthy, and what they're doing, they are basically some of the first people who are exploring this option of family life. And yeah.
That's awesome. Now, because we want to know more, can you tell us a little bit more about ION, and tying in another question on the specific and intentional use of they, them pronouns that you brought forth with us?
Absolutely. So Aeon is in this world. Aeon is a humanoid bot, but the intention is that is not the life that they are going to live. They are going to live as a human. They have parents. And I don't know if you guys caught the part in the story where Coral is nervous. She's like, what if people find out? They don't want people to know, what they have going on. Aeon's pronoun is they. Aeon does not have an assigned gender. In this narrative, the person can choose to have a gender as they develop, or Aeon can choose to stay genderless. So the idea is that, the parents get their child, and the parents actually have the option to have a gendered child or not. But Ross and Coral they deliberately chose to have Aeon be genderless. And if Aeon so chooses a gender amongst their human development, they can do that. And if not, they don't have to.
Wow, what a world. What a world. And it's so interesting to hear you share that brilliance. There's tons of comments coming in, but does anyone have any specific questions about this futuristic world I think we all want to get to try one day?
Wonderful.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It's a big deal to me because I don't, I'm an aspiring writer, so I'm blown away by, the people who have studied the writing and do it, all the time, and they're published. And so this is a very encouraging experience for me, and I'm super grateful.
Well, from what I just heard, you're not an aspiring writer. You are a writer.
You are a writer.
Yes, you definitely. You are a writer. Oh my God.
Yeah.
And my mother and father would be so proud of you because of your reading with expression, which gave life to your story. That's something they always did, telling my sister and I bedtime stories. And they were actors too, by the way. But it really just set off all this beautiful imagery. You've got a future, girl.
Thank you so much, Miss Debbie. So good to see you too.
Yeah, you young people, Ericka and Isis, you have this incredible, exuberant energy. I love it. It's so wonderful.
Thank you.
Really wonderful. And Cheryl, you too, but you know what I mean. These young people, they're coming up, they're amazing.
Well, yeah, I'm still kicking.
Well, Mills has certainly launched and grown a lot of talent, everyone here. I'm enjoying this.
Yes, me too. Yes. A little note, when I was at Mills, Isis and her partner in crime, Pilar, and myself and my partner in crime, Tamisa, would always stumble upon them in the trees in the lounges or in the dining hall, and they would be creating these stories that like I didn't understand, but it made sense to them. And there would be poetry and these far tales that my young mind couldn't appreciate. And then I realized, oh, they're doing art, but like not in a way that I've learned it. And it's because I went to a science-focused high school, so like arts was the option that was least available. And it reminded me in such a non-traditional way that folks create so many different things and follow a path that speaks to them. And I think it's really beautiful to hear all of the different imagery and pieces that have come together in you and writing this passage that you said with us tonight. I'm looking forward to what else we can learn about this future universe. And can you write it in the next 30 years so there's potential for me to get to be there?
Oh, definitely.
And there's a couple questions on, of course, affirming your writing, your voice, and when would you like to be complete? I think we're looking at what's your goal in wrapping up the story. How does that help with your writing if there's a timeline?
So I usually, most of my writing is actually like more prose style. So like I'll just pick up my pen and, you know, whatever I read about that day or whatever's on my mind. And I have a lot of writing like that. So I'm kind of actually like steering my ship right now to like, you know, take myself a little more seriously, because I've been playing around with a lot of different ideas, and it's been a playful thing. But I feel like in the past, I would say maybe like the past year, I've been getting more serious. And this story about Aeon, it's definitely developing. I don't have like a title for it yet. I have quite a few developments in the story, but it definitely needs a lot of work still. So I'm really hoping if I can buckle down. My goal would to be to get like a draft done by the end of the year, and maybe like the end of next year, I could, you know, have a nice strong piece I could put out. I really want to put my work in the hands, very similar to Ericka, in the hands of young people, just because I want them to start thinking of the life to come, and not just the life to come, like it's going to happen to them, but I want them to be really thoughtful about the part that they play in the development of our world, our society, how we are integrating technology, to what extent are humans comfortable with the integration of technology. So I'm going to keep learning. There's still a lot to learn as far as like the science back end of doing like a AI project. So I have to learn like about machine learning and coding and, you know, heuristics and complex programs, and what it would be like to create a humanoid entity with the intention of them not just being a bot for service, but for them having their own consciousness. Aeon is a conscious being, and they should be respected as such in their life. And there's going to come a point in the story where the people around Aeon are going to be conflicted about, is Aeon real? Do we accept them as a human? You know, if they're programmed, am I programmed? So like, I want these thoughts to be swirling. So it's going to take a little bit of time to develop it properly, but I definitely want to keep working on it. You guys have really encouraged me, so I'm super excited.
Yes. A question from Suzanne wants to know how old your children are, and amazed at you having a full-time job and coming into this creativity. Want to share a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm mom. That's like my main thing. I have a 7-year-old, 2 boys, 7 and 3, and they are fabulous. They're wonderful children. I'm very blessed to have them. And yes, my job is definitely full-time. I'm also an educator. I run special education program for medically fragile students. So students with cerebral palsy, They may have traumatic brain injuries. A lot of my students are in wheelchairs. So I do program development and curriculum for them.
Awesome. So awesome. Any other questions or words of affirmation and encouragement for Isis while we still have time with her? Just trust your gift. I like that.
That was perfect. Thank you. I really appreciate everyone that's here tonight. And I love you guys, and just be well and safe, and lots of love to your families.
Yay. All right, Miss Chelsea, handing it back to you.
All right. Well, first, I'm certain every single one of us wishes all those same things back to you, Isis. Thank you for your reading, and you are a writer. I wanted to continue this program, and I loved doing it at Reunion because I've always enjoyed writing myself, but have often struggled with that idea of, am I valid because I've never been published? And I wanted to make sure that it was pretty evident that this was open to anyone who was writing. You are a writer, whether you have been published or have written 2 things or 1,000. Anyway, our 4th author who's going to be gracing our evening with their work is, let me get my bio up, is Dr. Paige J Gardner. And Dr. Gardner has a depth of experience in crisis management, facilitating diversity and equity trainings, identity development workshops, and professional development retreats for college students, staff, and faculty. Her research agenda focuses on gender equity in the workplace, as well as scholar practitioner identity development. As a queer Black woman of color, Paige finds great importance in advocating, empowering, and building solidarity-based coalitions with and for those on the margins of society. Inspired by the African proverb, "I am because we are," Paige builds community, cultivates change, and creates space for others to take the lead. Tonight, Dr. Gardner will be treating us to a piece called "Tired of Being Every Woman." I'm going to spotlight you now, Paige, and you are on.
All right, can folks hear me? I think we should be working. Thank you all so much for being here this evening. And what an honor to be on this panel. I don't even know how or why I am here. These pieces, I'm in awe of them, and just appreciate the work that's being shared here and the level of vulnerability that's been brought into this space. Y'all are inspiring me, and it's just powerful to be here with my Mills family. So I have like this quick little introduction, and then I'm gonna get started. I've chosen to read a reflection that I wrote shortly after publishing an article with my dissertation chair and research team back in 2018. I hope you all will go read this article, Hidden in Plain Sight, uncovering the emotional labor of Black women students at historically white colleges and universities, as it provides great insight on how Black women navigate spaces that were not designed for our success. So as you can see, I'm going to take a more practical approach to this piece that I share with you all. I also didn't want to just straight up read academic work, right? Because sometimes it's hard to connect to it. So when I say this is practical, it's really stemming from my experience with work life and personal life merging into one. I work from home. I'm an assistant dean and an adjunct faculty, and I do everything here, literally in this space that I'm at right now with you all. So this piece will really speak to that. And again, I had another piece that I was going to read to you all that was still under the same umbrella, but my spirit shifted when we started this space. And so I really want to share a blog that I've authored for an organization that I'm a co-founder for called Career Killing Moves, which is a digital storytelling platform for women of color in higher education. And I thought this would serve as the perfect excerpt for tonight's event. And if you want to follow along, feel free to click the link that is shared in the chat. And I believe I sent the link to both of our hosts this evening. So if they want to put it there, it's great. Sometimes when you follow along, you can just be connected even more. So I'm gonna get started. Tired of being every woman, scaling down emotional labor to maximize agency in the workplace. How many of us grew up loving the classic hit, I'm every woman? The more interesting question is, which version did you grow up listening to? The one by Chaka Khan or Whitney Houston? Mine was Whitney Houston's, which became my personal anthem and aspirational stance throughout my childhood and teenage years. I internalized the lyrics of this song and believed that my worth would forever be connected to the ways I serve others. I took pride, at times still taking pride, in being the one who can multitask high-level priorities, keep cool, enthusiastic mannerisms, being the trusted one, being the good listener who makes people feel validated, and being the one to inspire a team to stick together during challenging times. I've been practicing emotional labor long before I became a professional in higher education. It's no wonder student affairs became my life's work, as I found deep personal satisfaction in offering emotional labor at no cost. With 11 years of student affairs scholar practitioner experience under my belt, I've learned that emotional labor is inescapable and at times used as a necessary tool to maintain productivity, navigate politics, and build trust in professional and personal relationships. In exchange for compensation, emotional labor in the workplace requires an employee to meet their institutional expectations and provide excellent service to students and other key stakeholders. The employee must conceal personal feelings and maintain a positive demeanor to ensure that institutional management, campus partners, and student constituencies are satisfied. As such, institutional satisfaction takes the form of student staff retention, tuition dollars, and institutional prestige. Clocking emotional labor. Though emotional labor is a necessary function in the workplace, it becomes burdensome when there is an incongruity with compensation, recognition, and when it's used over an extended period of time. Normally, I experience emotional labor in autopilot mode, where it's secondhand nature for me to constantly give to others. Because I care about my work and I love fostering relationships with others, it becomes hard to detect when emotional labor becomes a problem. So I have 5 examples of what emotional labor can look like. And as you hear them, if any of these sound like you or they resonate, show some love in the chat. We can continue to build community with one another the way we have this evening. So the first one, constraining personal feelings. I am most familiar with this form of emotional labor, as it is easy for me to silence my voice or my gut instinct in the hopes of maintaining my team player status. I also fear being labeled the angry Black woman. So I know there are times that I silence myself to protect and control how I'm perceived by others. The second, battling exploitation. As a queer Black cis woman of color, I'm often one of the few queer people of color or few Black people or few Black women at the table. I find myself in this position when people often come to me as the race expert and any other expert, right, connected to my intersecting identities, despite my personal feelings and intersectional identities. This all gets tricky when students who share their similar social identities look to me for support. I understand that there's a need for me to offer unwavering support, but most times when I offer this fierce support, I'm not well resourced, nor am I given the same level of support in return. My emotional labor becomes exploited when I'm at capacity and institutional management still expects me to produce with no additional support. Third one, performing excellence. This is normally coupled with how I battle exploitation. I continue to push myself to perform excellence despite being at capacity. I strive to produce excellent work so that my worth is not questioned. The more I perform excellence, the more I am able to maintain my reputation and seat at some table. However, this is a false narrative. A great sister colleague of mine once said, good work is rewarded with more work. So keep in mind that perfectionism will not protect you, nor will it allow you to care for yourself in a meaningful way. Fourthly, emotional gymnastics. I often forget how much performance emotional labor requires. For example, I have to decipher and decode messages from the institutional management. I am often a liaison or representative who's tasked to interpret needs and boundaries between students and institutional leadership. At times, I even find myself working hard to anticipate needs and fill the gaps of my department, my division, when issues arise. Oftentimes, emotional gymnastics leaves me exhausted as I do a whole lot of extra work on top of my current position. And lastly, constant, or what I like to say, permanent exhaustion. For the past month, my one-word check-in during team meetings has been exhaustion. Nowadays, I'm so exhausted from being the only, fill in the identity, being the good representative, and going the extra mile. One thing I've learned is that the politics of respectability are exhausting. I spend more energy performing rather than just doing the work. This level of exhaustion means that I'm so busy that I'm not making time for self-care. It often means I'm not setting boundaries, or my boundaries are not being respected. So again, throw in the chats if any of these resonate with you, or if you're currently experiencing that, whatever it is. Of course, there are a myriad of examples of emotional labor, but these are some that have come forward in my research and professional experience. This labor of love often goes undetected and without proper compensation, leading many employees to feel burned out and unsupported. Oftentimes, emotional labor requires an individual to be resourceful, good at anticipating needs, and willingness to support others. Though these aren't bad characteristics, engaging in emotional labor for a prolonged period of times create wear and tear that causes high turnover, permanent burnout, and prevention of career advancement. When women of color expend emotional labor unnecessarily, women of color are unable to show up as their full, authentic selves. Navigating COVID-19 and Racism 20. I have devoted so much of my life caring for others that it's become difficult to show up for myself the way that I do for others. COVID-19 and Racism 20 has forced me to look in the mirror and examine the ways I have managed to neglect my personal needs and desires. By working from home and being stripped of the daily in-person interactions, I was left with myself and suddenly didn't know what to do. The transition to working remotely from home was rough. During the first month, I overextended myself to prove that I am still every woman, or better yet, that I'm essential to my institution. In addition to COVID-19, our nation is also being forced to reckon with the US's original sin, racism. Though police brutality and the murdering of Black lives is not new, I think our Black community's level of exhaustion and rage feels new. As a queer Black cisgender woman of color, I am beginning to peel away the mask of respectability. I am committing to using my voice, even if it makes others uncomfortable. No more silencing myself or compromising my health and well-being. This also means I'm no longer willing to silence my salient identities within the Black community. I've been very vocal within my Black family and friends who claim to love me but hate LGBTQIA+ folks. I have set new boundaries and will not accept any level of hate from anyone. This year, all of us are being called to be vigilant, fierce leaders in our personal and professional communities. In preparing for this long marathon towards justice and liberation, I've decided there's no more room for emotional labor that is not compensated or well-resourced. One way to stay in the race is to decrease how much emotional labor I expend to avoid becoming resentful and/or powerless. Here are some examples of ways that I maximize agency in the workplace. Creating your system of support. I often refer to this as the SOS crew. Given that I work at a historically white institution, it is important that I identify colleagues within and friends outside of my workplace that allow me to unmask and truly release the frustrations and challenges that I experience in the workplace. I always have that one sister colleague who I can call ASAP and process a particular conversation and/or develop a quick strategy to address my concern. This safe space can offer support, be a sounding board, or an accomplice. It's also important that if your SOS crew supports you, that you also be willing to support your SOS crew. In some sense, this is where emotional labor can be healthy and helpful, so long as it's mutually beneficial. Protecting your time. Since I currently work where I live, I have learned that there is power in how I schedule my day and protect my time. I strive to set designated times for meals, water, stretch breaks, work tasks, etc. I also veer away from blocking my entire day with meetings so that I have time to slow down. Sometimes this is difficult, as my position requires me to be on call as an assistant dean, which I am actually on call today, and present to my team's needs as an interim director for another office. Don't strive for perfection, just strive to care for yourself. Self-care takes work, and there's no perfect way to do it. Speaking your truth. This is hard for me at times because I have conditioned myself to be the respectable colleague. Well, now I'm placing high value on speaking up and giving critical feedback to leadership and peer colleagues. I've learned to request support from my ally colleagues to either support me, back me up, or propose a particular idea first as a method to protection. Setting boundaries. There is an art to setting boundaries, especially for those of us who work in higher education. So many people need our brilliance, though at times our brilliance may not be appreciated, acknowledged, or compensated. Therefore, it can be easy to overextend ourselves and quickly burn out. I've begun to embrace the fact that I don't need to share every God-given gift with my workplace. I hold on to some of my great ideas because I know that good work is rewarded with what? More work. By setting boundaries, I have more control over my work and feel more empowered. In conclusion, by scaling down emotional labor in the workplace, I've maximized my agency and have found power in reclaiming my time, setting boundaries, and reframing my outlook on work during COVID-19 and Racism 20/21. Perhaps it's time we begin to scale down our emotional labor to maximize our agency. And that's it.
I could not help snapping and clapping and rolling my head the whole time because I felt all of that as we spoke so intentionally when I got the chance to visit you in Chicago and talked about challenges. Paige is also one of my other mill sisters, just for context. I was a freshman when Paige was a senior, and she helped gather me together because I did not know how to do mills.
Also, too. We were all in community together, so I was so excited when I got this invitation. I was like, yes.
Yes. To have them, as you can tell, like laying the groundwork, that is how I figured out how to do mills and fall into myself and challenge and speak up when necessary and build those relationships. And all of this was definitely a highlight of that conversation we had about even some of the professional decisions I needed to make and how to support students and not be like all up in their business because they tell you everything. Balance and boundaries and the care of self definitely reminded me the importance of that. And I'm excited to see more tips to integrate into being home in the same space where we work and are all the time. Congratulations on launching this platform for all of us to tap into as a resource.
Yes.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. The links to all of this are definitely in the chat, but let's kick off because I saw those questions coming in. Carol kicked us off with, how do you cope? You must be amazing. I can answer that, yes.
Oh, how do I cope? Honestly, Mills College is where it all started for me, okay? Mills College is where I got the language to articulate my experience. I grew up in a predominantly white town, so I was hyper aware, but I never had words like social justice, oppression, right? Like I knew what racism was, but I didn't know how to apply it, right? And so to me, I think the way that I cope through this is finding community. First and foremost, there is so much power in knowing where your safe, brave spaces are. where you can just be your full authentic self. And if I didn't have that when I was at Mills College, I would not have survived. I wouldn't have finished. I had, a life crisis moment, and coming into who I really was and having to change a major. And also having a mentor who's now like my life mentor. Many actually folks from Mills College are like my life mentors, but they're the ones who helped me get through my educational journey, helped me realize that there was more beyond an undergrad degree, helped me get through that last chapter of the dissertation. So Ericka, I'm sending you all the love when you say that you were a doc student. And so I think the coping starts with the relationships that you develop. And then I also think it's about how you give to those relationships, right? Because if you're invested, then folks will pour back into you. And so I've learned how to do that. And I think another part of coping is like carving out the time for self-care. And it's taken many years to really understand what that means. I think the first time that I experienced burnout, like real burnout, where physically, like my body wasn't well, I was stuck in the bed, I felt like a zombie, okay? So it was real burnout. I was like, oh, this is what they be talking about. That's when I had to slow down and kind of back away. And this is maybe when I was because I've been at Loyola University Chicago for 7.5 years. So this is maybe like 4 years into my time there when I realized I was doing way too much. And so I think the coping piece is just around carving out that time for yourself and saying no. And like realizing that every golden opportunity doesn't have to be picked. That's something that was told to me when I was in grad school, like getting my master's. And I didn't understand that until I went to work full time in Chicago. So I just have to slow myself down. And I think the last thing that I will say too is to remember that there's more to life than work. And this one is something that I am still grappling with right now. Like finding that identity and sense of worth outside of work. And it was so easy for me to do that when I love mentoring, building community, and I'm in a job that thrives when I do those types of things. But yeah, I have to step away from work. So things like that where I had therapy, that was non-negotiable. I would not take any meetings, evening meetings or activities with students during my therapy time. I sing in a choir. I love singing, grew up singing. I would also say that growing up in a Black church is where the community was developed, but also that's where I got to express myself as an artist. So me and my entire family sing. So I found a church, a Black queer church that I can join, right? A space that affirmed me, all of who I am, and began to have choir rehearsals again. And it was so much fun to say, this is a non-negotiable period of time too, where I will not allow work to interfere. So you start finding things to do that bring you joy that are separate from work so that it's easier for you to say no. Now, when I added the PhD program, that was a different, like, I had to figure out how to strike a new balance because school had to be a priority if I wanted it to get done. But what was fun about that was telling my job, like, look, if you're supporting me in being a student, that means I have to say no because I need to be a student at some point in time. So after 5 o'clock, I got to be out. And I took advantage of writing circles and really tried to develop like faculty mentor relationships so that I can learn from them and things of that nature. So long story short, or I guess I just gave you a bunch of things, but that's how I coped.
No, that is awesome. And it's all tools that I think we can all continue to integrate into our lives and reminders of putting those things first. Because work is not forever. Life, we want to live long lives and be healthy and engaged in them. I think that was a turning point for me too, is, when my doctor was like, so do you want to live beyond 65 or what's your plan? I was like, oh girl, say nothing else. Like, how do I scale back to make it happen? It's key. Now, Miss Carol's throwing in the good questions. I'm going to go on back to the chat here. She wrote in, about performing rather than actually doing the labor, and that intrigues her. So does it become the same thing? I'm guessing maybe over time.
Performing, like in terms of emotional labor, right? Like wearing the mask, does it become the same thing as
Yes. I'm looking at her nodding, so yes.
Does performing become the emotional labor? I think it just ties into what I was saying in the piece, that emotional labor, you're never going to get around not expending emotional labor. But I think it's about your control in it, right? And the agency that you experience in determining how much emotional labor you want to do. There are times where you have to buckle down and get the job done. And even when I don't feel good, there are times where I still have to show up for my students who are in crisis, right? Being a part of a Dean of Students team, I hear a lot of stories that are heartbreaking, and I could be having a crappy day, and I've got to kind of shake out of that for a second and really be there with my student in the moment. Be honest about what I can offer them, and honest about what I can't, but what I can help connect them to. And so I think you don't want to become entrapped by the mask. And if those of you, I don't know if folks have like clicked the link yet, but if you go to that site, the link, the picture shows like a woman holding a mask, and she's kind of like peeking out from the mask. And that's what I think emotional labor is like, right? When you're performing, you're wearing a mask, but it's not meant to be worn over long periods of time. You got to take that thing off and air out, right? So those are my thoughts.
There you go. And do you find it most frustrating when a lot of your emotional labor is invisible to some people because they don't know what it is? That's Miss Carol. She's firing these good questions.
Yeah, right. I'm like, woo. It is frustrating. And I think especially for newer professionals, or when you are in the process of transitioning, trying to get to that next level, sometimes you'll let things slide because you don't want to rock the boat. But now what I'm starting to realize is like, that's not going to do me any favors in the long run, So I've learned like great pivots, when people start taking me for granted or thinking like this is just a part of my job automatically, I start saying, that's a great idea. Let's find someone who can do that. I'd like to connect you to this office or department because they've done this so well. This looks like an untapped partnership. Like, let's explore that. But I've learned how to kind of deflect and pivot, in a way that perhaps I don't have to say, you're taking me for granted, but just letting folks know that I don't have the time. So let's start doing these connections and redirections. So I think that's one of the strategies that I've employed when kind of navigating the invisible, the assumptions that I should want to do these things, that I want to be here all day, all night, and not be compensated either, right? So that's like the other piece to this as well. In student affairs in general, right? We are taught to that this work is service to the student 24/7. You will do anything, and you get praised for overextending yourself. You get recognized for those late nights, and so sometimes it strokes your ego. But all of a sudden, when you crash and you realize that you don't get the help or the support that you need, you have to make a change. And so I think I've had some critical moments where I've realized, wow, if I don't choose me, no one else will. No one has to choose to care for me. It has to be me. So doing the doc program forced me to be more vocal about that. And then believe it or not, I'm in the process right now of critically evaluating again where I'm at in my career and what's serving me well. So I'm starting to look at faculty positions. Again, agency is key. I want to be in a job that allows me to be my full self, allows me to support students the best way I can. And right now I'm doing a bit of both, but I'm feeling like the faculty life is calling me, right? Where I can actually have space to be a creative, to dive more into the research, into the writing, and prepare graduate students to enter this field and get them to also think what it means to do this work, student affairs work, where you are whole and you can strike a balance and build or be able to sustain yourself in this work. Because if not, student affairs will chew you up and spit you out. And we have many of the same mentors. And so I know that we've seen it firsthand when we were students ourselves at Mills, and as we've grown now to be now peers of those mentors, right? Now I would say friendtors. It's great. Like, we get to feed each other and give each other critical feedback on how we're developing. So we literally, Kiri and I are laughing at each other because we know the conversations that we've had with people that we love.
Yes. And I now, like, I also had to take a moment where I had to go back and go, I'm so sorry. I was pointing out that you look so tired all the time.
Yes.
Probably wasn't helpful to the day that you were maybe experiencing, but I was just so candid. Didn't realize I could have maybe got you a cup of tea or a sandwich.
But I would say this is what I've learned, like, now in my role, when I build relationships with my students, I am honest. So I do take off the mask. I let them know that when I ask them how they're doing, I'm also sharing how I'm doing. I'm conflicted. I've had a long week, but I'm happy to be here with you in this moment. You know, oh, I just had a good therapy session and I'm feeling energized this week, or things like that, to also give my students permission, right? Because they are watching me too. I watched my mentors and thought, this is exactly how I have to do it. Now I'm realizing, oh, there are new ways that I can tweak the relationships that I make with students so that they also feel like they have permission to set boundaries, to say no, to back away from leadership positions if they're not serving you well while you're trying to graduate, or to pause, or whatever it is. So,
yeah. Yes. Sorry, this feed is, I mean, I'm loving this engagement. It's so much humans. More people than I've seen in like 2 weeks. So I'm loving this. Thank you for letting me share that. Suzanne adds, you know, her emotional labor becomes exploited when she's at capacity, and institutional management still expects me to produce. Oh no, she's highlighting your words. Okay. And then she puts, this is the sad part when women managers continue to expect so much from other women. Ooh, that's real.
So the research that I did for my dissertation followed 13 women of color who work in historically white institutions. And that was brought up, right, that even in looking for building their own support systems, confiding in certain women of color or women, right, who are in these leadership positions. But again, my research focused on women of color. So talking about how disheartening it was to then find someone who you look up to only to see that they are emulating, you know, white patriarchal leadership styles or values. And what I've learned in my research is that the higher up you go in this field, the lonelier it gets. And so I had someone who was more mid-level talking about a relationship that was difficult. And then I had a senior level administrator express how difficult it was. Like, you know, before they had community, it was easy. But as soon as they got to the top, there was no one. And there was no one they could confide in, because now they had this leadership role of responsibility and they felt locked in to that mask, right? So they had to perform, you know, perfection, any, you know, thing that is restricting, right? Like not being able to be your authentic self. And so it saddens me, right, to kind of see that piece where the idea that you have to give up a part of yourself to then get up to that next level. And it's real, y'all, and that's why I'm in this place of thinking, like, where else do I go? I'm an assistant dean, but, you know, the further you move away from students, the game changes, you know? I'm watching Dean of Thrones every day at work. So you know, that's a very true fact. And I think we need to have more spaces as well for women of color who are making it to the top to find community in spaces where they can also unmask and then figure out who they really want to be once they make it to that place. But institutions, historically white institutions, are not set up to help those leaders thrive, right? And be their full authentic self. So it's a double-edged sword and it's a challenge. But yes, thank you for that comment. That is so real.
Last one we'll take in is emphasis back in, a little highlighted on you singing, my dear friend. And a question in, we're not going to ask you to do a solo, I mean, unless you want to. But how difficult was you to find your church so that you could continue that joy that you needed in your life?
It took me 2 years. I think when I got to Chicago, it took a long time too, because I was still on a hiatus, if you will, from organized religion. Even though church played such a huge role in developing me as a leader, once I came into my full self, I also realized I wasn't okay, like being in certain church spaces and being told like, you're welcome to be here, but like, let's not talk about the queer stuff. Or, you know, I wasn't interested in performing or acting. And so I actually did have like a serious conversation with a past, she's a life mentor of mine, but she was my resident director at Mills College. She's the person who brought me to Loyola University Chicago, Sadiqa Solomon Hatta. And I told her that I felt like there was a piece of me missing. Like, I don't know what it is, but I miss singing, and singing is rooted to church. Am I being called back to church? Like, I don't know what it is. And she was like, this is the perfect space, because I'm at a Jesuit institution. This is the perfect space for you to actually sit with that and explore it. And she encouraged me and connected me to other Black women who were also looking for church homes. And we all committed to each other that we would visit these different churches. We all had the things that were important to us, and we were supporting each other and finding those spaces. And then it just so happened that one of the last churches that popped up, and I'm telling you, this was like 2 years in the making, Lighthouse Church of Chicago just popped up on Facebook somewhere, and went to the church and have been going ever since. And that's my home church. And that is, and then it took me some time to kind of get into being involved. And yeah, that's just kind of where I'm at now.
That is so awesome. And I do want to emphasize that she's very clear on that boundary of needing to get to choir rehearsal, because she definitely wrapped up our dinner gathering.
I did.
You smooth said, I need to get on the train. Here's how you get back to where you're staying so you don't get lost. Love ya. Bye-bye.
I really did do that. You're right. I had rehearsal. So
yes. But I love that, you know, you've always reminded all of us through our connection to you the importance of doing the things that are so important or meaningful to you to help you stay balanced and stay grounded. And if it doesn't feel that way, then you gotta take a moment to reevaluate what that is. And I remember when I first started working with students, that was one of the first pieces of advice you gave me, because it's a lot of work, and it's hard work, and it's emotional work, but it feels so good and empowering. But you can't get too lost in all the feels, because then you get lost yourself.
Yes. Thank you. That was
Thank
the
you.
best sum up.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to toss it back to Chelsea. We've got Miss Alex that's up next.
Yes, all right. Our final author of the night. And please, everyone, give her a huge round of applause for ending our time together and being this wonderful bookend to these other wonderful authors. Is Alexandria Brown, a queer Black librarian, local historian, writer, and author of 2 books on the history of Napa County, California's marginalized communities. She has a BA with honors in anthropology and sociology, a master's of library and information science, and a master's in U.S. history. She writes about speculative fiction and young adult literature for Tor.com and Locus Magazine, as well as on her blog, which I will link below, but is bookjockeyalex.com. Diversity, equity, inclusion, and access set the foundation of all of her work. You may have noticed Alex was featured in a quarterly article that came out in March 2020 called Expanding Worlds and Minds. Also will be linked, so please read that and check it out in addition to all of Alex's fabulous work. You can find her on her blog, as we said, Book Jockey Alex, or on Twitter at Queen of Rats. And tonight we'll be hearing about the Black history of Napa Valley. Alex, please, you are on center stage.
Hey, there I am. You can see book number 2, Lost Restaurants, about food history and culinary history of Napa County. I'm reading from my first one, which is Hidden History of Napa Valley. Like Chelsea said, it's about the history of marginalized communities. Basically, if you think about Napa, you think wine and you think rich old white people, and this is basically everybody else that helped build the valley. Chinese immigrants, indigenous people, African Americans, braceros, and Mexican Spanish colonists, everybody else that helped build the valley. Because it is like 7:45 and we're all kind of running out of steam here, I am not going to read for the full 10 minutes. I'm just going to read a short little excerpt, and then we can jump right in. I also have like 3 hours worth of freelance work that I got to do tonight, so I'm going to make this short and sweet so I can get paid. Okay, so the chapter that I'm reading from, or it's a section on African American history in Napa. Okay. Part 3, Struggle and Progress. This is a quote from Edward Hatton, who was an African-American man from Massachusetts who moved to Napa in late 1850s. He was one of the early group of African-Americans in Napa County in 1850s. His quote, "Why should we of this state be treated with so much injustice? Are we not as intelligent as any class of the community? And are we not taxed as well as others? Why this distinction? I think it is time we should be doing something for ourselves." I love Edward Hatton. Okay, chapter 7, Reconstruction. The Civil War ended in 1865, but the tide of white supremacy did not turn. With the passing of the 13th and 14th Amendments in 1865 and 1868, slavery was abolished and African Americans were granted full citizenship. Yet while African Americans jumped at the chance to participate in political and legal processes long denied them, they were still excluded from many other rights white Americans enjoyed unencumbered. Nevertheless, Black Californians worked tirelessly to improve their lives and those of their children. Like all other Californians, Black Californians were required to pay school taxes, but state law barred African Americans from enrolling in white schools. Any public school that tried to integrate risked the loss of state funding. A separate school could be set up if there were at least 10 Black children in the school district, but it could not receive public funds. So African Americans took matters into their own hands and opened colored schools throughout the state. How unfortunately, while colored schools were separate, they were hardly equal. Napa's colored school opened in the fall of 1867. Oh, by the way, I'm using the phrase colored school because that's what they called it back then. I would not use that phrase today. That's the term that they used historically, and I respect the term that they have used historically. Okay. Napa's colored school opened in the fall of 1867. Within 2 years, there were 17 Black school-age children in Napa County, 10 of whom were attending the segregated school. That number remained fairly constant through the school's brief but successful existence. Under the tutelage of a local white woman, 4 made honor roll in 1875, Lizzie and Liza Bowser, Edward Hatton Jr., and Adeline West. In 1874, the California State Supreme Court heard the case Ward v. Flood, wherein a Black girl named Mary Frances Ward was refused enrollment at the all-white Broadway Grammar School in San Francisco. The case was funded in part by African American families across the state. The court sided against Ward, saying her 14th Amendment rights had not been violated because she had access to the colored school regardless of the quality of its facilities or distance from her home. It was, in a way, a precursor to Plessy v. Ferguson, the 1896 Supreme Court case that established the legal justification for separate but equal. Ward v. Flood further stipulated that in school districts with no colored schools and fewer than 10 Black children, white schools were required to integrate. So it's a weird little contradiction there. J.S. Boone, an African-American man in Oakville, criticized the decision as one made by, quote, a lot of 10-year-old boys. He remarked that, quote, if we must have separate schools for our children, I suppose it's all right. We will make some of our prejudiced citizens help pay taxes to educate them. 4 years later, the financial strain of maintaining segregated schools prompted the Napa School District to close the colored school. 30 or so school-age Black children integrated into the area's public schools that fall. Jumping ahead, on March 30, 1870, the 15th Amendment was ratified, granting all male citizens the right to vote. Across the nation, African Americans celebrated, including in Napa. A large group led by Frederick Sparrow and Joseph S. Hatton, who was Edward Hatton's son, met at Hartson's Hall. The celebrations included prayer and singing, a reading of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, and a 100-gun salute. Black Reverend and activist William H. Hillary from San Francisco gave a fiery, funny speech, followed by a dance at Quinn and Williams Hall that went on until midnight. A few months prior, Hatton had recorded 38 eligible Black voters, including himself. all were men, as women were not able to vote in the United States until 1920. At 27 years old, Frederick Sparrow became the first African American to register to vote in Napa County. Thank you. Obviously, there's a lot more in this about Black people, but that's a tiny, tiny little segment.
Well, it's so awesome to even know. I didn't know that there were Black folks in Napa. I mean, I'm in Sonoma County, and I know we make up 2% of the population.
Yeah, nobody knows that. I sort of, when I got my master's in U.S. history thesis, I did my thesis work on Black history in Napa, and that thesis kind of formed part of the chapter in this book. But I sort of ironically titled my thesis, quote, "There are no Black people in Napa, a history of African Americans in Napa County," because every time I would say I was researching them, people would go, "But there aren't any Black people." Like, well, there's at least one. I am a Black person from Napa. Turns out there's actually many of us, and we were here back in the 1840s, and we've been here all the way through, and yes.
Yes, and then like what a way to draw attention to a story that I think would be easily left untold. And I even recently, and I'm going to read your book so that I can figure out more. But you know, one of the things I even learned recently in Sonoma County is Rohnert Park in Cotati had its founder was an African American man, and that school was closed 3 years ago because of low enrollment to then open a tech high school. And I was like, what a way to silence the history. And just amazing way that these counties have, you know, we know them for wine, but we don't always know the people that helped lay the foundation of the beautiful groves that we see to this day.
I'm going to ruin the Press Democrat for you, because the reason it's called the Press Democrat is because it was founded around the 1860s, and it was founded as a secessionist paper because they were against the Civil War. It was the old school Democrats. That's where they came
Got it. Got it.
Not always.
A lot of sense in some of the articles that come out from there. There are a few questions here in the chat, so I want to make sure I get to those. Let's see here. Question of, do you know Susan Anderson?
I don't, but if she is an African-American person in Napa County, I guarantee you I am probably no more than 3 degrees separation from her. So we are all sort of connected in some way, shape, or form.
I'll put you in touch with her. She's doing, she's a California historian, and she's doing some work similar to your scholarship.
Nice. That'd be nice. Thank you.
Awesome. I love those connections. And a question from Carol is, did Dr. Hatton did Hatton Sr. come out of the gold rush? And then a follow-up, was Hatton free?
So
I don't know how those two.
No, I mean, yes, there were African Americans in California for the gold rush. There were a few that were here prior to the gold rush, very, very few, and most of them, you know, were like trappers and things like that, or people who would jump ship, stuff like that. Most of the African Americans, I mean, some came over for the gold rush and worked in the mines. There were an estimated probably a couple hundred, maybe up to 500 enslaved Africans who were working in the gold fields. But there was a large, when California opened up, there was a active movement, just like in the 1920s, there was an active movement from free African Americans in the North to settle in California, because it was a free state. It was new. It didn't come with all this baggage. Well, I mean, it came with a lot of baggage, but it didn't come with the same kind of baggage. So they wanted to settle in California. You get a few that come over as overland, often tied to enslavement, or they labor, you know, I'm going to be your servant while we walk across the country, because it was not safe to just sort of walk across by yourself as a Black person. The train doesn't become a thing until like the mid 1860s. So you had to have money. So a lot of middle-class African Americans from the North. Hatton was from New Bedford, Massachusetts, and there's a huge contingency of New Bedford, Massachusetts African Americans in the North Bay, San Francisco area in the 1850s, 1860s, and they kind of settled. They're one of the main founding groups, and there was an intentional push of, we are coming to California, and so they, you know, sailed the boat all the way around. And in Napa in particular, there was a push to settle a Black community in Napa. There was an intentional, we are going to buy property. In the 1860s, we had 10 Black farmers with 10 or more, or excuse me, with 100 or more acres of land around Napa City. You know, they own land, they own property. We had 2 Black churches. You know, there was a drive. So Manhattan was free. He was born free. His family did marry into enslaved or people who were born enslaved, because we had both in Napa County. In fact, one of the oldest residents that we had, she was here in 1849. Her name was Lizzie Brooks, and she died at 105 in Napa County. She was brought into Napa when she was 65. As an enslaved woman. So yeah.
Wow. What a history. And all of your studies, you know, and as you're putting together the histories together, what has shocked you the most?
Ooh, I'd say in particular with this book, we actually had a slave case. I don't know if anybody's familiar with the Archie Lee case, but it was a big slave case in San Francisco, really tested California's supposed free non-state or non-slave state, you know, rules. And we had a version of that in Napa, which I did not read that segment, but the short version is of an African-American family was brought, they were enslaved in North Carolina, were brought west, were brought to California, and the white guy broke their bondage contract, freed everybody except for the 14-year-old boy. And then his father took him to court, but at the time, African-Americans could not testify in court. So the case was thrown out, and then the white guy turned around and sued for perjury. And then once again, the Black guy could not testify in court. And then 2 other, actually Edward Hatton and another African-American free man, exchanged labor in order to, you know, they worked off the $500 bail in labor in order to get their friend out of jail. So, yeah.
Wow. Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Questions here. Was Napa advertising for African-American settlers?
No, nobody was doing that. Or not white communities were doing that. I think Allensworth probably did that. If you're ever in California and we can travel again, Allensworth State Park, it's near Bakersfield. It's California's only Black founded town. It was founded by Black people for Black people, and it's a state park now. Highly recommended. It's very, very cool. But yeah, no, we were not advertising for African Americans, but there was the African Americans that settled there. We did have 2 Black newspapers in San Francisco, and the editors of those Black newspapers used to come up to Napa, and they would write really glowing articles about how great it was, and you know, how hard it was to get Black people to go up there. And I'm like, yeah, no, I feel you. I feel you.
A question from Beverly that came in is, was the KKK in Napa?
Hell yes. I don't know this officially, but I know this unofficially, they're still in Napa today. But yeah, we had a pretty active Klan population. A couple of city council members were in the Klan. There was a big Klan speaker from San Francisco who used to come up and speak at the local high school about once a month or so. Like, it was very active. We had 2 big rallies. The first one had about, I can't remember how many the first one had. The second one was had almost 10,000, or excuse me, the first one I think had 10,000 and the second one had 30,000. I'll have to look up my numbers again. Lots of spectators. Yeah, they had a big rally down by what's now Napa State Hospital and lit a giant cross and inducted a bunch of sailors from Mare Island. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds super familiar. And Claudia Rose, they're still there. Yes, they're still there.
We don't have a chapter in Napa, but there are still Klansmen. I know somebody who's had a noose hung on his property. Yeah. Yes, there are still members.
Yes, between some of the community work I do, joined forces with folks who've put a lot of pressure on the local law enforcement departments because of what we saw on January 6th. And both Napa County Sheriff, Sonoma County Sheriff, and the respective departments below, as far as local policing, they've all been buckling down, really, really tight-lipped on who participated in the insurrection at the Capitol and just avoiding the question like crazy. But there's been a huge uprise because of officers raising the thin blue line flag, and many were known to have participated in the caravan that went and started in Marin City, which is
I know. I had
predominantly
the
Black.
pleasure of seeing that on the highway.
Yes, my aunt was in the Target parking lot, and she's a mature adult, so she almost got hit with a baseball bat, but it wasn't until a white gentleman and his son stepped in between. I think she would have been in the hospital after that event. And just watching the craziness on the freeway and no interruption from police.
I found that, especially because there were so many, there were like 3 or 4 miles of cars. Like I was counting, I was driving up from, my family lives in Southern Marin. And so I was driving up, back up to Santa Rosa because I was living in Santa Rosa at the time. And it was almost like 4 miles worth of cars. And they had it blocked in such a way, like you couldn't exit if you were on the freeway, and you couldn't enter if you were trying to get on. Like, and they were driving like 30 miles an hour on the freeway. What are you doing? You're not helping your case here. They were flipping
not at all
off. That I'm like, nobody's bothering you. Nobody, what is?
That was a reminder that while there may not be huge active chapters of KKK, that there are a lot of folks who are preserving that history, and they made it clear on that ride from Marin City through Lake County and back. Oh goodness. Are there any other questions while we have time with Alex? I want to make sure as the chat is slowing down, if there are folks who have things that are coming to mind, that we give some space for you to jump into if you want your voice to be heard. There's certainly a fascinating history, and I mean, amazing. I've got your blog open, I'm reading some things. I'm looking forward to diving in more and learning more. What are some of the key takeaways that you've been able to maybe integrate into your work with students?
Oh yeah, really just pushing them to look beyond sort of what they think they know, and what they see in the news, because you're only ever seeing this tiny little portion. Marginalized voices often get silenced or ignored, and so really kind of pushing them to, and also to really challenge the notion of who is an expert. I think we have this really rigid idea of who is an expert, and it's generally like an old white man who has a 15 doctorate stuff after his name, and he gets to lay down the law of what the history is, and we're all just supposed to go sure. And I like to really push back on that, and especially when it comes to marginalized voices, because we may not have had the opportunities to become doctors or to get tenure. I mean, I was just kind of flipping through Twitter, and like, poor Cornell West, it doesn't even have tenure. How do you not give tenure to Cornell West?
Right.
It's just like, so, how do you deny these opportunities, or, people who are denied these opportunities, who are prevented from having these opportunities, and considering them experts anyways. I interviewed a lot of people when I did the hidden history book. I interviewed community members Chinese Americans who were living in Napa, who knew some of the early families that were here, and I count them as experts. It was just a guy. He was a Chinese American guy, grew up in Napa, but he's the expert of the Chinese American experience in Napa. And to me, that's important. I would rather hear from him than hear from what Alfred Kroeber has to say. I want to hear from. When I did the research on the indigenous communities, I did include some Kroeber because you kind of have to, but I made sure that whenever possible to to let the people speak for themselves, and to let them be the expert in their own experiences. So if somebody said something, I used their words. I put their quote in there in quotes, and I said, so-and-so said this, because they are the expert of that experience. And it's not my job as a historian to tell people what their experience was, or to rephrase it, or to change it, or to take it, or anything else, or to dictate my rules over it. I have this opportunity to let them speak for themselves, and so I intend to do it.
Yeah. A question that came in from Beverly is, what did you enjoy in researching your books?
Oh, I like researching in general. The historian, archivist part in me. I always like that. I spent probably a year researching for hidden history, digging through old newspapers and all kinds of stuff, looking for that. yeah, I think all of it's really fun. I will say the worst part of it, which is not what she asked, but I'm gonna say it anyways, especially for hidden history, I had to look up a lot of the racist stuff, which meant that I basically had a doc where I, Chinese, and then had a list of all of the racist terms that were used to describe Chinese people and Black people, and then a list of all the racist terms to describe. And I had to look up each one of those terms in the newspapers because we didn't use, like Negro all the time. There were other terms that were used for us, and the Chinese in particular. And actually researching the Chinese, I researched them for about a month because there was so much written on them. And I tell you, like, I had to take a week off because you can only read about white people throwing rocks at Chinese immigrants so many times before you're just like, I need a break. Like, I can't handle this. This is too much. It was rough. It was intense. But like I said, I felt like they needed the opportunity to tell their stories. So I'm ultimately glad I did it, but it was tough.
I bet. Random question to see if there's a connection. Did you find any links between folks named and the history of Mills? Since it's not so far away.
I feel like I did, but now I cannot remember at all. But I feel like I encountered somebody. But yeah, Napa's Black community was, I think, very different than Oakland's and Vallejo's now. It's our community in Napa disappeared for economic reasons and then also health reasons. There was a tuberculosis outbreak. But so like by the 1900, I mean, we had lost almost all of the African Americans. There were very, very few. They had either died off or their children, the first generation's children, were like, fuck this, I'm getting out of here and went elsewhere. So they were just like, bye. And they did not come back. So yeah, so we didn't produce a lot of people. The ones that stayed, were trapped in sort of janitorial work or domestic work, sort of low skill, although I hate that term. It's not low skill. They just didn't have the opportunities to get higher education. They didn't have the opportunities to have a middle class. They were kind of trapped in these low wage jobs. So they were not the ones going off to mills.
Right. Wow. I feel like there's another whole world I need to uncover in this abundance of free time I like to create for myself to learn more about the area I'm living in and a city that I didn't think Black folks took up residence.
I always like to say, if there are no Black people in an area, there's a reason that there are no Black people in that area. And it's not the Black people. It's not us. We will move anywhere. Give us an opportunity and we'll go there. But if it is 2021 and you can count the number of Black people on one hand, there's a reason, and it's usually white people.
Yeah, that is so true. Thank you so much for sharing your work. I want to just circle back with anyone else if you have questions or want to voice your wows out loud, because I am wow. You have uncovered a new part of the earth I need to pay more attention to, and be aware of the histories of where folks go. I'm definitely feeling inspired to share a post and like highlight all these things I've learned from each and every one of you this evening. And I mean, I don't have a huge following. I'm not an influencer, but I like to believe I am, so that people can learn more. It's just so much rich history that you've taken the time to uncover, discover, and pull it into writing and publish that folks can continue to review. And I hope that the leaders in Napa's, county supervisors and city council, if they have not already, like I'm trying to figure out how do we get them that book and make sure they're reading it too, as they're trying to make difficult decisions in this next year, particularly around the success of the youth that continue to seem to be punished by some of the policies they've put in place.
I will say I'm doing a Black History Month event that a local African-American man he's been putting on for a couple of years now. And I'm moderating a panel on Saturday afternoon at 2. If you go to my Twitter, there's links on my Twitter, but Black teens are going to be talking about their experience of being a Black teenager in Napa. So it should be really exciting. I'm very excited to let them, the things they're going to talk about. I've seen some snippets of it, and it's going to be really interesting. So
yes. Okay, I will be there and I'll bring my crew, educational wonkies, because this is exciting work and super necessary and enlightening. There's some awesome work you put in there, and thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
I think that means that we are done for the evening. I think we're correct. We have been, just everyone unmute, please, and just kind of clap your hands. You've all been wonderful. You've been a great audience and wonderful authors. And really every single one of the authors we've heard from today have brought so much to the table and shared so much with us. So I always say thank you to all of our authors, but especially tonight, thank you to all of you, Alex, Paige, Ericka, Isis, Cheryl, who stepped away earlier, and also to Kirsten for helping to run the show and being
Thank you.
So thank you so much for coming. Again, you are an author if you have written anything. That's it, point blank. Please, if you want to be involved as a reader in a future edition of this, feel free to contact Alumni Relations at alumni-relations@mills.edu. I encourage you to do so. And if you have read for us already and you want to read again, let us know. I didn't even think that would be an option. And then Michelle, who was here earlier tonight, who's read for us before, said, I want to do it again. So we'll hear from her again in the future. Please, thank you all so much. I encourage you to go relax and take care of yourselves, but thank you again so much. And this will be posted on YouTube next week.
Michelle was still here.
Oh, Michelle's still here. Okay.
Yes.
Night.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.